the belief, simply the belief that experience is divided up into separate parts, that instead of experience being one seamless, indivisible totality made out of consciousness or awareness, there is a belief that awareness doesn't permeate all experience equally. It just permeates this little cluster of sensations called the body-mind. With this belief, awareness is shrunk into the body. Of course, this never actually happens, but it is imagined to take place. So once we have, through belief, through imagination, shrunk awareness into the body, the world, objects, and all others jump, as it were, outside. So this belief that what we are is a separate entity is the mother of the world, the mother of the outside world. It is the belief with which the idea of the outside world is born. Once that belief has taken place, we are, as it were, destined as this entity that we imagine ourselves to be. We are destined to go out into this imagined world, seeking the love, the peace, and the happiness, which is in fact inherent in awareness. In fact, it's not inherent in awareness, it is awareness. Happiness is the nature of consciousness, or love is the nature of consciousness. Its nature of love or happiness is seemingly veiled by the belief that what we are is a separate person. In other words, by the belief that awareness is located and limited. The love, which is itself awareness, is veiled. And from that moment onwards, the separate entity goes out into the imagined world, seeking the love and the peace and the happiness that is seemingly lost as a result of this belief. And so we go out, we try to form relationships that will deliver love. We try to acquire objects that will deliver happiness, and we try to manipulate situations in the hopes of securing peace. And of course, we all know that this endeavor is doomed to failure. So sooner or later, we, as it were, turn round and we question this one who is in search, the separate entity that is moving around in the separate outside world in search of love, peace, and happiness. And when we look for this entity, we don't find it. When we look for the I, we find the I of awareness, not the I of the separate entity. And when we look for the nature of this awareness, we don't find something located and limited. We find this open, spacious, unlimited, ever-present or eternal presence. And what is it that finds or recognizes this awareness? Only something that is both present and aware could recognize awareness. In other words, it recognizes itself. It comes, as it were, to itself. The dualizing thought with which we imagined that awareness is located and limited dissolves, and at that moment, which is, of course, a timeless moment because the mind is not present there, at that timeless moment, awareness, as it were, and this is just a metaphor, as it were, it tastes itself, it recognizes itself, and that is the moment that we all know of as love or happiness. When the mind rises again, it rises up out of this timeless taste of our own nature, and it misinterprets the experience. It again recreates the separate I in the body and the separate you or world out there, and it says, I love you, or the object that I acquired was the cause of my happiness. So the whole round of seeking for love in relationships and for happiness in objects starts all over again. And as we all know, we repeat this cycle over and over and over again, seeking love, peace, and happiness in relationships, situations, and objects, until one day, sooner or later, it begins to dawn on us. Maybe peace, happiness, love doesn't reside in objects. Maybe we have made a fundamental mistake going out into this world of objectivity, looking for happiness. And we turn round, as it were, of course it's just a metaphor, we turn round and we question this seeking I. And when we find that it is non-existent as such, in other words, as an entity, right there, the seeking I dissolves. Of course, it was never there in the first place. So the imagined seeking I, the imagination ceases, and awareness, as it were, tastes itself. It starts with a belief that awareness is located and limited. There's only one thing that belief cannot stand, and that is being looked at. As long as we don't look under our bed at night, the fear of the tiger that resides there has the possibility of remaining. There's only one thing the tiger cannot stand, and that is being looked at. We look under the bed, there's nothing there. There's only one thing the separate entity cannot stand, and that is being looked at. Because when it is looked at, it is found to be non-existent. So this ignorance, and I don't mean ignorance in a pejorative or negative sense, I just mean the ignoring of our true nature. This ignorance thrives on inadvertence, on not being clearly seen. And when it is clearly seen, it is clearly seen to be non-existent. That is why in India they used to speak of the illusion of ignorance. They don't speak of ignorance, they speak of the illusion of ignorance, because there is no true ignorance. There is no real forgetting of the self. There is no real separate entity. It all takes place in the imagination, and then it is further substantiated at the level of the body with feelings. So the sense of separation validates and substantiates itself in the body with feelings, and then it further substantiates itself with activities, behaviors. And in this way, the separate entity seems to grow very deep roots, and it becomes this dense, sticky web of thoughts and feelings and activities. But at its heart, there is this belief that awareness is located and limited. In other words, there is just a simple, empty belief at its heart. The sense of separation doesn't mind what it uses to validate itself or to substantiate itself. As long as it substantiates itself, it is happy.
It doesn't matter what form that substantiation takes. It doesn't matter.
You know, when the separate entity is going out, it doesn't mind what it dresses in, as long as it dresses in something. To begin with, it will find all the conventional means of validating itself. But once we become interested in spiritual matters, then these conventional means, substances and all the usual addictions that we know about, whether they're just subtle or more displayed, once we become interested in spiritual matters, the separate entity feels that it can no longer hide in the conventional addictions to substances and relationships. So it has to find a more subtle guise. So as we become interested in spiritual life, the separate entity, and of course I'm just caricaturing it here, the separate entity thinks, oh, okay, that's fine. I'll just appropriate the spiritual teaching, I'll make that my new identity, and I'll take refuge in that. I'll use that to substantiate and validate myself. So it appropriates the teaching for itself and strengthens itself, validates itself with all kinds of spiritual practices, fools itself that it's trying to get rid of itself. In fact, getting rid of itself is one of the more subtle means, and in fact it's not very subtle, but getting rid of the ego is one of the ego's main tools. It's safe sometimes for decades.
Keeping up that activity.
Keeping up that, that's as good as drugs or anything else.
Yeah.
Getting rid of itself, it can keep itself busy, it can perpetuate itself for 20, 30, 40 years, quite happily trying to get rid of itself, meditating for hours and hours a day, whatever it is in each case. I'm not suggesting that meditating for hours a day is necessarily an activity of the ego trying to perpetuate itself. Not at all, but it can be.
Yes.
So the ego can appropriate anything at all. It's a past master at using anything.